Hey y'all, welcome to Soccer for Us. On this episode, we are going to be chatting about the U.S. Women's National Team Olympic roster. To do that, I am bringing on Jackie Gutierrez from Women Kickballs, who is the foremost expert in NWSL that I know of. And I'm glad that she's on this podcast with me today to talk about these players, 18 players on this roster, many of whom are NWSL players. Jackie, thanks for joining me. And you recently graduated with a master's degree. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks so much for hyping me up. Well, I feel like I'm not I appreciate it. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, good stuff. Really excited to talk about NWSL and the national team roster. Obviously, so much has been going on in preparation for the Olympics. So yeah, excited to dive into it.
Just so everyone listening knows, she is still wearing her graduate hood. I'm kidding. She's not doing that, but I still have mine in the closet somewhere.
Yeah, in SoCal. So maybe that'll come out soon, but yeah.
Well, Jackie, you have been working on this master's degree, but also covering NWSL. And we are now in the NWSL regular season. We're at like 7 games in for most teams, 6 for some. I just really want to know right off the bat, what's been the biggest takeaway you've had during this regular season? Not Challenge Cup, because that kind of is, I hope they keep that because it's a cool little special tournament of its own. But for this regular season, what has been the one thing that's shocked you the most or that has surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think obviously for NWSL fans who've previously followed the season, we always know like North Carolina Courage being on top of the rankings. And so it's nice to just see a change of things where they're not on, the first place standing of things. So I have been so impressed with Orlando Pride and what they've been doing. It's like such like night and day, their performance, at least from previous seasons. And I'm just like, unfortunately, I haven't been able to catch one of their games live. And I'm like always so bummed because every time I miss a game from them, it's like just next level. I mean, the fact that they like have been unbeaten in 7 games now, or sorry, 6 games at least, that is so crazy to me. So I think that's something that I've been noticing a lot. And I think with obviously last year being very different and then hopping into the NWSL Challenge Cup this year, I just think that like mini preseason kind of vibe gave like everyone a good feel of like, okay, we're back in this and getting into things. But I also think just the overall schedule, I know because of COVID has been altered, but there's just like so many games happening. So I don't know in terms of player wise how that's affecting them with the traveling and just all the adjustments, and obviously the Olympics coming up. So I know that has probably taken a toll on some players, and obviously that kind of allows them to be more prone to injuries when you have so much going on in terms of playing. But overall, I just think it's been an incredible season. I feel like the bar has been raised to like next level. And so it's just really exciting to see what these players are doing and how they're even utilizing some of these challenges to their advantage when it comes to travel or national team camps. So I've been so impressed so far. What about you?
Yeah, it's been definitely a weird and difficult season, as you mentioned, with COVID. Still doing the Challenge Cup at the beginning of the year, which I like because I think it's a fun way to get back into soccer in general. But it's definitely you can't take anything from the Challenge Cup and like say, oh, this is what the regular season is going to look like, as we're kind of seeing right now. But honestly, for me, it is that Orlando Pride are winning games. Not that I, revel in all Orlando sports misery, but it was kind of funny as an Atlanta soccer fan to see not only, and granted last year, Orlando City did pretty well in MLS, but both of their teams in Orlando have been struggle buses. And, this year to see Orlando performing so well. And it's been weird because for those who don't know, I mean, Orlando has Marta, they have Sydney LaRue, who's the season's top scorer. They have Alex Morgan, Aaron McLeod from Canada's team. They have Ali Riley, who's going to the Olympics with Australia. Like they have top to bottom, and Taylor Korniak, who's also right up there in goals and assists. They've had talent before, and the fact that it's now coming together is pretty impressive. And then also, this is a surprise, but you mentioned North Carolina Courage not being as dominant as they typically are, which is, their third place, whatever. But Portland Thorns still being so just solid. They've been a very good team throughout their history. And the fact that I think they've scored the most goals in the league, if I'm correct. And, that's a pretty impressive feat for them. it's weird that NWSL has kind of created, I'll put the Thorns and Courage into this category too, like just dynamite teams that are pretty always good. It's nice to see Orlando playing up to the talent level that they have. So I want to talk again some more about NWSL, but like let's look at this Olympic roster and talk about NWSL because there are a lot of players from the NWSL who are on this roster and a couple that not sure where they're going because they don't really have a team right now. We'll get to that in a second. So Vlatko Andonovski announced his 18-player roster for the 2020, not 2021, 2020 women's soccer tournament in Tokyo this summer. The goalkeepers, Adriana Franch from Portland and Alyssa Nair from Chicago. Defenders, Abby Dahlkemper from Manchester City, still there. Tiana Davidson with Chicago, Crystal Dunn at Portland, Kelly O'Hara from Washington, Becky Sauerbrunn at Portland, and Emily Sonnet at Washington as well. And the midfielders, Julie Ertz, who is reportedly going to play with Chicago, Lindsay Horan at Portland, Rose Lavelle now with OL Reign ending her spell at Manchester City, Christy Muse from Houston Dash, and her sister Samantha Muse from North Carolina Courage. And up top, Tobin Heath, who has also been injured for, 17 years, it feels like right now, who doesn't have a club. Carly Lloyd with Gotham FC, Alex Morgan at Orlando, Kristen Press, again, not with a club, and Megan Rapinoe with OL Reign. Now, before we get into that, I have to ask you that Tobin Heath and Kristen Press situation. So they were at Manchester United, did pretty darn good at Manchester United, helping that team, which had not been, we think of Manchester United being a great club in England. On the women's side, they've struggled for a few years, and Tobin Heath and Kristen Press helped push them to top 4 spot in the Women's Super League. Now they're leaving Manchester. They're coming back, presumably to the States. I think Racing Louisville has the rights. I'm not sure what's going on there. Fill us in what the situation is with those players, if you can.
Yeah, so at the 2021 draft, it's like always try to weird to think of that. But basically what happened is that, Tobin Heath and Kristen Press, their playing rights were traded to Racing Louisville FC. And so it's kind of weird, seeing the roster and these unattached players, like quote unquote, how they listed them there. So that was interesting. It's like, just tell us how you really feel, I guess. But so to have them kind of be like in this weird mystery box of like, no one really knows. I guess like my thought process is like, I don't even know if they're going to make it to racing just because of the turnaround time of things being so fast. Right. And so it's like, if they're now being called into the national team camp, like obviously that's their focus because it's a huge tournament. So I don't even know if they would even finish the remainder of the NWSL season, which goes until October. So yeah, I'm not good at math, but we're in July. That's 3 more months or, August, I guess. So maybe 2 more months when they would actually get back. Again, it's very questionable just because nothing has been solidified or confirmed. I'm interested to see if Christy Hawley, head coach of Racing, is going to be using them as some sort of pawn, towards San Diego or LA teams. So we'll see. But I think that's definitely something that is probably on his radar just because of Christy Hawley being such a great coach in terms of his knowledge of the game. I'm sure he would definitely want to use that to his advantage after, just his first year with Racing. So even adding them into the mix as well, like that's just a big thing with, now having 10 teams in NWSL and just like how it's expanding. So a lot of growth happening, but definitely interested to see what's going to come from that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting that they weren't listed as Racing Louisville players because, again, Racing Louisville owns their rights. So it's not like they don't belong to a club. They do technically. Mm-hmm. But I'm with you. I'm not sure either of them end up going to Racing Louisville. I think that was probably a pickup because they were obviously let go because they were at Manchester United. And I think they said, we'll pick them up because worst case scenario, we trade them for something. You can get valuable resources for one, if not both of those. But yeah, it's interesting that they are listed as unattached.
Yeah, I just thought that was like really just kind of funny, honestly, because I'm like, okay, we don't even hear anything from these players in terms of their club, and then literally listed as unattached. Like that sticks out like a sore thumb. But yeah.
Well, 4 alternates were also named. They'll travel to Japan. Obviously, these are for if someone gets hurt before the tournament, all this kind of stuff, and probably also COVID precautions as well. Who knows at this point? Goalkeeper Jane Campbell at Houston, Casey Kruger in defense, midfielder Katarina Macario, who plays still at Lyon, and Lynn Williams. None of those ladies have made they've played under Vlatko. It seems like they haven't really made an impact the way that some people want. I still think Lynn Williams has played and performed pretty good under Vlatko. And I guess for me, I'm wondering. So I'm just going to jump into the controversy, and I know, this is this has been my take. I have 2 issues with players, really 3 issues with players on this roster. And the first one is Carly Lloyd, just because she's 39 and I'm tired of seeing her in a U.S. women's national team jersey. It's time to let someone who is only ever going to be a backup go and bring in someone who can play that position as well. I'm looking at Ashley Hatch and wondering why she hasn't gotten a look at all. But other than Carly, for just like personal reasons, I do have questions about Tobin Heath and Julie Ertz being included. Very much Ertz because well, really both of them, but Ertz, even in the press conference, Vlatko said that Ertz is still hopefully going to be ready. It didn't seem like she's ready to play right now. He did say that Tobin will play during the send-off series on July 1st or 5th, one of those games. But I'm still just concerned that we have 2 players coming onto this roster who haven't played since their injury. And Tobin specifically hasn't played since at all this year. She hasn't played in the calendar year of 2021. Mm-hmm. Does that concern you? Do you think, Vlatko says that he has been told and thinks that they're good to go, but that has to be a question that Vlatko's been asked, right?
Oh yeah, totally. People have been asking him for like weeks, if not months, about Heath at least. And I remember, a few months ago, like someone had asked about that, and he had said, we're doing everything to be working with Tobin Heath. He was getting like daily updates on her, physical health. Even former, Royals head coach Laura Harvey was working very closely with Heath to like really bring her back. And so I think when I heard that, it was like, okay, he's obviously trying to like do a lot to make this happen. So from that press conference the other day, actually he talked about that and said that actually Julie Ertz's injury isn't as intense as Heath. So that's something where he's trying to work gradually to bring them both into these send-off series matches and then hopefully getting them more minutes into the group play or group stage. So, obviously that's good that he's kind of working up to it. But again, if you have Sweden the first opening match of the Olympics, like that's going to be an intense game. So I'm curious as to how much group play they could actually get just based off the competitors. It's not just like, Mexico, they're ranked number 28th in FIFA rankings. Sure, you could throw them in there.
They're pretty decent, but you can take a chance.
So, we'll just see kind of like what happens. Yeah. But I think from like just my understanding, at least hearing like Heath being on the roster, it is kind of like, oh, obviously this is a great player who, has so much experience and has a lot to bring to the table. But you also want to have players who can like mix well, and obviously with the national team changing so much, it'll just be interesting to see if that's something where she can fit in terms of just chemistry and building off of each other and kind of mixing in with a new crowd compared. Sure, there's some veteran players on here, but still it's always like really good to be able to have those, matches before. So I guess we'll kind of just see what happens when it comes to, July 1st.
Yeah. It just, so specifically with Tobin, I think my issue is, not that I think that people think that when you criticize a women's national team player, you're criticizing women's soccer as a whole. And I'm not doing that. I'm trying to objectively look at the situation and go, I don't like this. Because my issue with bringing Tobin in isn't that I don't think Tobin's a good player, because she's a phenomenal player. She's been one of my favorite U.S. women's players, and she got drafted by the Atlanta Beat. Didn't play here because she was injured. But, she's been a great player for the U.S. women's national team for a decade. But it's at a position that we don't necessarily need. Like, if you're to say, hey, you have to take a backup winger, I'm like, okay, which 7? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of ladies lining up who are really good and could play on that wing position. And the number one that I always come to is Lynn Williams, who has 3 goals in I think 6 games for North Carolina, has been a very prolific goal scorer in NWSL. Evaluating that, I guess, where do you think that Lynn Williams, what do you think is the reason she's not on this roster, given that she also barely missed out on the 2019 roster, it seemed like, as well?
Right. Yeah. Actually, it's interesting to look at Lynn Williams because this past weekend she also just scored a brace for the Courage and they won.
Yep.
So it's like, yeah, it is kind of crazy to see that too. And I know in previous times interviewing her, she had talked about just kind of playing styles with the Courage and the national team. They're obviously like a little bit different of where she's at in the midfield, and then obviously more up top areas. So I don't know for Vlatko if that was something where he just felt more comfortable putting in Heath or someone else in the midfield and then, just keeping her as a backup. But I do think that Lynn Williams is someone I've recently seen I've just been like so impressed with lately. And so it is kind of weird, but I also know I was listening to the press conference the other day where Vlatko was talking about players being able to adapt to their system, which is also kind of broad in a sense where you're like, what does that actually mean? And so at least from my understanding of how I was interpreting that was just like where they're at in their mindset and how they're playing. So playing styles as well. And I don't know if that's something where, like I said, maybe he just thought, okay, we'll bring her in as needed, but like at least she's there. So it is kind of weird that, obviously he just has so many options to choose from. I mean, you look at that too. It's like Mallory Pugh, Sophia Smith, Jessica McDonald, like they didn't get called up. So I think, to choose 5 midfielders, it just seems like, that's got to be such a difficult decision. And also, it's like, where do you go with that? Because you have so many options, at least in this area too. So,
it's definitely. I don't think there are wrong choices with this roster. I think it would be very hard to make a wrong choice for a U.S. Women's National Team roster because the quality and the depth of talent is just outstanding. Let's move on a little bit to Julie Ertz, who I think is a little bit more of an important player and in a position that is definitely more of a important position and a shallow position as opposed to Tobin Heath. She's been called up, but she, from what I recall, Vlatko saying she probably won't play. I think he actually said she wouldn't at all play in that send-off series against Mexico to open July. Is it concerning that she's not playing? Is it concerning that she has not come back to play a game since getting injured? She has a strained MCL, which she got back in May with the match with Chicago Red Stars. So, I mean, I think she's more important, but I'm still just really concerned because a strained MCL on your knee can be problematic, and if it's not fully recovered, that could be even bigger issues.
Right. Yeah, I think it's kind of weird. Just I feel like I haven't heard of like Julie Ertz in a long time, or at least a few weeks, just because of her injury. So it is kind of weird. Just like again, that's something else too. Where you're like, okay, you don't really know what's going on. So yeah, it is kind of just feels like a little bit questionable. Of like, well, what are you gonna like? What's your plan for that? I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, I honestly don't really have like a whole lot to say just because that's something where, like I said, I feel like I just haven't heard of her, like seen going on with her. But I mean, I think obviously if you have someone on the roster, like you would want to put them to use. And so I think with a player like her, it's like, well, I hope that you're able to like bring on this player and at least utilize them or like, if they do need to get called up, to play in a game, at least you can be confident in that. So I don't know if it's something where maybe he's just giving her more time to like be fully recovered and then calling on her, or kind of just like feeling things out with, where they're going to be at too. But with the, just schedule as, or for the Olympics, I think it's going to be, a lot of tight games and a lot of just intense heat in Japan. So again, I feel like if you have 18 players on a roster at one point or like another, going to at least use them, even if it is for the last 10 minutes of game or something, or if injuries happen. So, it's just weird not necessarily having like a grip of like, oh, this is where she's at, or this is what's going to happen, just because it's like, again, another like mystery thing.
Yeah, it's weird because like you said, she's been injured since May, and we got an answer pretty quickly after it was, I think within the week that we knew like, oh, this is a strained MCL.
Mhm.
And we knew it wasn't going to be too long, but it seems like there hasn't been a lot of information coming from Rory Dames about her actual status,
Right.
which I don't know if that's concerning more than it's just frustrating. You're someone who works covering NWSL. I mean, is it frustrating that you can't get more injury news out of these clubs?
Yeah, honestly, I was thinking about that too because I was covering the rain match against Chicago this past week in Tacoma, and like she wasn't even listed, on the roster even as a substitute,
Right.
something like that. So it is just kind of like, okay, what's going on? But yeah, it is interesting because when you're reporting on these things, like you do get like tons of emails as far as like Zoom meetings and press conferences. So sometimes it's honestly hard to keep up with my email, but
Yeah.
I think too, yeah, a lot of times you're not going to get an injury report unless you ask for it or you start looking it up and then find it. So that is kind of weird, but some teams are more open to like sending those updates periodically. So it just depends.
Mhm.
But I think that is definitely another question to raise of like, what's the status of this? Just because the Olympics are going to be happening in less than a month. So
Yeah.
I don't know if she's going to be playing, for a club before then or not at all. I highly doubt it, but yeah, I guess that's another
Yeah.
thing where kind of like, I guess we'll see until we come to that.
Yeah, it's going to be different for
Mhm.
these Olympic players because they're going to play the send-off series set at the beginning of July 1st and 5th, and then go to Tokyo. So, if you're not playing with your club now, you're not going to see them until August. And if you're not
Mhm.
fit to go, I can't imagine you getting on a plane to Japan without being cleared to play. And I would find it hard for you to be cleared to play if you don't play an actual match.
Right.
Vlatko did say that there would be a closed door match in Japan when they got there. We obviously will probably get zero news out of that because I doubt any reporter is really going to be able to go to Japan and watch it, let alone get reports. So we
Mhm.
will see how those two progress from their injury. The other point of contention for me was the goalkeepers because specifically in NWSL this year, I'm not saying Alyssa Nair has played poorly. That's not my point.
Mhm.
But Chicago's given up a lot of goals. On the flip side, you have Adriana Franch, who Portland's had like four. I think every match they've won, they shut the other team out. So I think they have like 4 clean sheets or something like that. Clearly a better season for Franch than Nair. And then you had Jane Campbell in the mix, who was called up as an alternate, but being there with Houston, who had a really good season and run last year during that Challenge Cup. For me, being as young as she is, she's the next number one goalkeeper for the U.S. Women's National Team. So I'm just curious where you make all of those 3 goalkeepers and how they've performed in NWSL this season.
Yeah, I was honestly like so excited to see Adriana Fant or like who also goes by AD France too, just to see like her on the roster. I think that was something where yeah, like her that playing record for the Thorns, I mean, it blows me away when I look at that
Yeah.
and seeing time and time again, even the highlights reel of just all these saves on goals. So I think that was something where I was like really excited and pleased just to see this player who has worked so hard and then to also just see where it takes him as well. So that's something where, again, I am just like, okay, that's like a no brainer. But then, yeah, I think Alyssa Nair, like, obviously being on the roster as well, it is something where, yeah, club performances obviously do play a huge part into like this decision, like as Vlatko has made that known. But like you were saying, I think as a whole, when you look at Chicago, I mean, and where they're at, it's kind of like I don't really, I'm not like super impressed with them being in 6th place and not really having like the greatest playing record right
They've
now.
given up the most goals in the league, from what I remember, and checking that, yeah, they've given up 10 goals, which is tied for Racing Louisville, an expansion club, and then Kansas City, who are at the bottom of the table. So maybe they're really missing Julie Ertz.
Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, it seems there's a bit of a struggle. But then it's hard too because it's like obviously with goalkeepers, the ball has to get through everyone before, it can get to the back of the net. So it is hard to like not
Yeah,
put the pressure, but it is weird initially just being like, oh, okay. But I mean, Nair has been, has a lot of history with the club. So that's like another, like, I'm not shocked by that as well. I was kind of like, I mean, Jane Campbell is obviously a great goalkeeper, but I think because of Ashton Harris's, experience with the club with the league, and then also with, Orlando Pride and just gosh, like I said, I've been so impressed with
Mhm.
Clyde. And so for me, it was kind of like shocking not to see her on the roster just because I think she's been like
Yeah.
absolutely crushing it this season. And so that was like kind of interesting. And I don't know as far as, with having alternate players, like how many like I know that might even change too, just because they were trying to petition to have 22 players on the roster instead of 18. So
Yeah.
just that whole ordeal. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, I hope that there's no injuries in terms of goalkeepers, but at least he does have like a decent, kind of like plan B just in case anything were to happen. So yeah, but definitely shocked to not see Ashton Harris on that, and don't know the entire reasoning for it. But yeah, those are just my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to put this as nicely as I can, but I'm glad Ashlyn Harris has been transitioned out because she is at the age where you're like, thanks, but there are, I know Vlatko doesn't believe age matters, and I'm not saying it does necessarily, but at some point you have to go, okay, if you want the future to be good, then you have to start making them the present. And that's kind of going to be something that we talk about a little bit later. But yeah, I think Adriana Franch, she's done everything she needs to do to get into this roster. I still prefer Jane Campbell, but Franch has been so good this season. She was a part of the 23-player roster that went to the 2019 Women's World Cup. So, she's been in the team, and she's been pretty solid in NWSL since she started playing in the league. So I have zero problems with the goalkeepers who are taken, really. I think that at the end of the day, you were picking two players who were pretty darn good, and no one else is really better than the others. So let's talk a little bit about this midfield, because I think the back line is pretty set. You're going to see Kelly O'Hare on the right, Abby Dahlkemper, Tierna Davidson, Abby Dahlkemper, Becky Sauerbrunn in the middle, and then Crystal Dunn out wide, and then probably Davidson and Sonner obviously brought in because they can play both center back or on the right or left side. But midfielders are none of these players were a real surprise. Christy Mewes being included wasn't really a surprise. But how do you choose which three are playing every game?
Yeah, that's tough because yeah, you have so many good options, and I think that you can kind of go a lot of ways with it. Honestly, don't even know, like what that's going to fully look like. I think like with these players being so strong, it's going to just be interesting to see that chemistry of how it's going to work and fluctuate.
Yeah.
And then also too, just thinking about, I mean, we talked about it a little bit already, but like injuries, I feel like I hate bringing it up, but it also is, a huge part of the game of just not really knowing what's going to happen, and just the physical conditions that these players are going to be in. So although I'm not like saying, be prepared because like someone's about to get injured, it's like, it's just always like an unknown possibility that you kind of don't really like think about until it happens. So yeah, honestly, like I looked at midfield and I'm just like, well, where do you go with it? I mean, like I think like even just seeing Rose Lavelle, that's a player that obviously stands out, and just the way that she uses her speed throughout the game, and is like also just a very smart player as well. And so I think seeing, at least from my understanding of what Vlatko was talking about, is he's wanting to have that aspect of having veteran players and then also like younger players, and kind of finding that like sweet spot of it. And so I just think that'll be important as far as younger players or players who are called up for the first time for an Olympic roster, of just kind of like being able to follow that leadership and what's ahead of them. But I honestly can't even like begin to like try to piece together like just all that, because I think with midfield and then other forward options as well, like they have a lot of like ways to go about it.
Yeah, so the goalkeepers, all of them have been at a major tournament with the U.S. before. Defenders, all of them have been at an Olympics before. And in the midfield, you actually have the most debutantes for the Olympics. You have 4 out of the 5 haven't made an Olympic roster, if I got that correct. So that's a really cool thing to see. It's really cool to see, but at the same time, all but Christy Mewes were on that 2019 roster. So it's like, is the Olympics are definitely different than the Women's World Cup for a lot of reasons, but everyone on this roster has big game experience. So again, that midfield, with Rose Lavelle, Sam Mewis, Lindsey Horan, Christy Mewis, and then Julie Ertz coming back from injury. It's a lot of rotation that you can put into and I think that's important when you consider you're going to have 3 matches in 6 days.
Right. Mm-hmm. And not
who
just
in the
but even to like the heat of it. I mean, like,
oh yeah,
it's already getting hot and it's like summertime, but Japan is going to be like almost like just gross weather. But yeah, sorry to cut you off what you were saying.
No, you're 100% right in how that's been, how that will affect them, because it's just going to be so. You're still playing in August or June and August, or July and August, so it's going to be, it's going to be a lot. Yeah. Looking at that midfield, though, I think that's where you're going to find the most important players on this team. Who there has the most ability, do you think, if you're going to look at this U.S. women's team and say, okay, they're going to win gold, which player has to step up the most from that midfield?
Oh, gosh, that's hard. Well, I mean, only because we kind of talked about it already, but I think with Julie Ertz's injury, like that's kind of already a setback when you look at the other 4 players there. So I think just considering the circumstances, that's something that I would say. But overall, I think when I look at these players, even in their club leagues, just seeing like where they're at and how they're coming up with assists or how they're getting, creative in the midfield and just like working so many different angles to set up their teammates. Like I'm honestly just kind of blown away by that. And I think, outside of probably, I obviously would say Christy Mewis and Rose Lavelle, who I feel like are quote unquote newer players to the national team. I think these other veteran players also have like a lot to give in that aspect, but it's interesting just because like that aspect of veteran and maybe non-veteran or whatever, you even have differences there, but then you also like, with Julie Ertz being a veteran, then there's an injury, or then there's, kind of like that unknown there. So I think there is kind of like some holes in different areas for each player. But yeah, that would just be my go-to answer, just considering injury is a big deal. You haven't played in a while and you're kind of like, everyone's kind of just wondering on that.
Well, and for me, that makes Lindsey Horan so important. And fact checking myself there, she did make the 2016 Olympic roster, so this is her second Olympics. Sorry for that. But that to me makes her more important because we saw in those matches in the summer series that they played in June, she was the one who played at that Julie Ertz position, the deep lying midfielder. She still dribbled and went forward, which I'm concerned a little bit about because, to be quite honest, Portugal, Jamaica, and Nigeria are not Sweden, New Zealand, Australia. I do think that, we saw the U.S. women play Sweden earlier this year. It was the toughest game they've had since maybe the 2019 game against France, or England is probably the better example of that. But, I'm concerned because that is our first group match is against Sweden. First match of the Olympics is against Sweden. We don't know the status of Julie Ertz. We don't really know how healthy she'll be. We don't know if she'll be able to go 45, if she'll be able to go 90, if she can go 93 times in a row in 6 days, like type of thing. So Lindsey Horan becomes super important because she's the obvious substitute at that role, being, a more ball-winning midfielder. I think she can do it, but doing it against Portugal, doing it against Nigeria or Jamaica is very different than having to do it against Sweden and the attacking talent they have, the midfield talent they have, but the just structure that they play with.
Right. Yeah, I think it is going to be interesting, like you were talking about, even the summer series. I didn't get to keep up with those matches, but I think like
you're busy.
I was a little busy graduating, trying to do life stuff. But I think like you were saying, that's like a totally different competitive like level when it comes to who you're playing against and who you're showing up with. And so I think for me, I'm just curious as to whether or not like how Mexico got thrown in the mix because they're like, like just kind of low on things on ranking wise.
Yeah.
But sure, like
surprised we didn't do it against Canada, to be quite honest. Like they're going to the Olympics as well. We're both in North America. Like it would make sense on. I don't work for U.S. Soccer, but sometimes I think I could plan things more better than they could. I don't know why they're playing in, Connecticut when they got to fly to Tokyo, play in Portland, and then fly to Tokyo, or play in San Jose at their stadium and fly to Tokyo, and you could have had Canada and the US just play a couple games there and, go off. So what do I know?
I'll be sure to write a letter of recommendation to U.S. Soccer when you put your application in.
Well, if you listen, listeners, if you remember, we did a an episode earlier where we drafted the venues for the Men's World Cup cycle. So, I'm ready to plan and pick out places to go watch you play. I'd just put every match in Atlanta. That would be the problem, though.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But no, seriously, I do think that it's, your point, Mexico is, I still think, the third best team in CONCACAF, but that's such a drop off. And even, we saw what it was against Portugal, who I know that we only won 1-0, but that match was we could have scored so much more against Portugal. Inés Ferreira had a great match, their goalkeeper. And, sometimes that just happens where it's hot and it's muggy and you're like, it's just a friendly. Sorry, you're not going to score 10 goals against every team. But Sweden, it's funny. It's been funny because that Sweden match, I remember watching it in April, and we tied 1-1, and we did not look good. But we didn't look the way we normally do because we were playing an actually good opponent.
When you look at the top 5 FIFA rankings, I mean, Sweden is at number 5. So it's like you still have, a buffer in between with Germany, France, and the Netherlands. But then it's like Sweden, like you were saying, obviously there's, when you look at previous match records, but then again, you have Vlatko and who hasn't, lost a match.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that'll be interesting just to see. It's like, is Sweden going to come out again where you're like, oh, this is something new? Or is it going to be something where we're able to kind of use that to our advantage, where we find their weak points pretty fast? That's just something that comes to mind as you were talking about that. But it is weird when you think about that last Sweden match and you're just like, I don't really know how to feel about this because it's not the greatest, but
shockingly, you play a really good team and you don't look as great as you should. You played a good team. That's sorry you're not scoring 10 goals a game or you're not connecting to 78 passes before getting a shot off. Sweden's very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So just other things to think about too, as if hopefully going past the round of 16 and, kind of getting down to the wires when it comes to dealing with those other teams that are going to be, top notch. So
you mentioned pushing into the round 16. So basically the schedule goes, you have 3 matches. We finish up on a Tuesday. We finish up on a Tuesday. And then we have about a week off and we do basically the same cadence again, 3 matches in 6 days for quarterfinal, semifinal, and the championship final. It's a very compressed schedule, both for the group stage and for the knockouts. And that brings me to our next position group, and that's forwards. The average age of the forwards of this U.S. women's national team roster by the time that this tournament will start is going to be 34.4 years old. They're going to all average 34 years or older. And that's not just because Carly Lloyd's skewing that. Everyone who's in this forward line is above the age of 30, right? Mm-hmm. Alex Morgan will turn 32 before the tournament starts, and she's the youngest forward. That's concerning to me because I'm almost 32 and I wake up with a stiff calf if I don't sleep correctly. You're right. My back hurts because I put my pillow in the wrong spot. Now, obviously these ladies are fantastically better athletes than I am and training at a higher level than I ever have or do currently. But I'm just concerned that when you look at this roster of aging, I mean, it's the fact they're aging stars. Mm-hmm. That schedule concerns me, and that's where I'm like, we couldn't have found a spot for Lynn Williams, Sophia Smith, Katarina Macario, someone who just had a little bit more youthful exuberance, who sure isn't as familiar with everyone. Because you look at this roster, this front 5, and it's that's been the attacking players the U.S. has played since the 2015 World Cup. I mean, it's just been who it is. It's concerning. I don't know if you share that concern, but it concerns me.
No, I see your point as far as just what that looks like in a very tight schedule of the Olympics. But then too, I mean, I don't know, with the 2019 World Cup, sure, that was probably very similar as well. And it worked for them. So, but again, it was also Jill Ellis era. But I think with Vlatko, I don't know exactly what his entire reasoning for that is. Obviously, these are, like you were saying, great players, but I know for him, he very much was like adamant about saying how veteran players, like he also sees them as something where they can add a lot more depth to the team. And yeah, I don't know. I just think it'll be interesting to see like what that looks like in terms of, yeah, like again, not to like jinx it, but of injuries and of just how much, just like physical exhaustion that puts on their bodies, just because it's going to be like a lot of different things.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I think that none of these players are bad. Mm-hmm. It's not like I'm going, how dare they make the roster? I'm just concerned because for a couple of reasons. I think this is something that really does concern me legitimately is if you're always banking on veteran experience, mm-hmm. at some point, when do they transition out? Because I'm sorry, Carly Lloyd, I know she doesn't want to hear this, but eventually she's not going to be able to play soccer the way that she wants to anymore. I know she just refuses to accept that based on her, interesting interaction she had with the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter. But, she's 39. She'll be 39 by the time the tournament starts. I'm sorry, I don't see her being a factor in 2023 because she'll be over 40 by that point, Mm-hmm. At some point, I'm just concerned of this Olympic roster to me could have been the perfect time to bring in Lynn Williams or Sophia Smith or Katarina Macario or even some other forwards who have been pretty good in, again, we mentioned Ashley Hatch, and I'm like, why hasn't she been getting a run out with the women's national team? Mm-hmm. Just because, again, this is not as high a stakes, I think, of a tournament. I think that's fair to say about the Olympics. It's World Cup is most important. Olympics are second most important. It's still really important. You want to win gold, especially given you didn't win 2016. But at some point, you have to bring in new players at these major tournaments because if you're only relying on veteran experience, well, then you're going to bring a 41-year-old Carly Lloyd to the 23 World Cup because she has experience. And then I also would push back and just say, okay, Carly Lloyd's does Carly Lloyd being in the locker room, or even to an extent Megan Rapinoe being in the locker room, does that mean that somehow, like, if they're gone, does that mean that Lindsey Horan forgets how to be intense during a soccer game? Like, mm-hmm. Is that going to mean that Abby Dahlkemper forgets that she's supposed to play soccer hard that day? That bothers me. Like, I just feel like this whole veteran thing is a bunch of nonsense, to be quite honest, because it's like there's veteran presence, and then you have a team that averages 32 years old. Mm-hmm. And everyone on this team has played in a women's World Cup other than Christy Mewis. And she's old. She's still old. She's 30, so it's like, it's not like she's a young player moving in. She's still an older player moving in. So I don't know. I can't hide my concern about the age of this roster because I've also seen in men's World Cup, especially, that older teams tend to not do as well. Mm-hmm. You bring in a lot of veteran players and they're like, oh yeah, here we go. We're going to do it in the World Cup. And you go, somehow they just get run off the pitch by a younger team. And so that concerns me. We're the oldest team in the tournament from what I can gather from all the rosters that have been released. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, Jackie. It's the one thing where I'm like, this is not great, y'all.
Yeah, no, it is like, I think definitely something to think about. And yeah, Vlatko always says like, someone had asked him the other day about Carly Lloyd's age, and he just, obviously said that he doesn't judge a player based off that. And he was saying how for him, it just speaks, and again, this was like his words, but he sees it as a way where like it speaks a lot about Carly and who she is as an athlete and her just continuing to press forward. And I think like with Megan Rapinoe too, that's like another, I think, player that a lot of people look at, especially after the 2019 World Cup. And I haven't totally looked into exactly where he was getting his stats from here, but he had said that in 2021 that Rapinoe has the most goals and Lloyd has the most assists.
And that's valid, but I would push back and say, well, yeah, because you keep playing them every damn match. Of course they're going to, like, I'm sorry, when they're playing how do I say this?
I obviously see you have a lot of thoughts on it, but
I have a lot of thoughts. It's just like, okay, like we played Colombia twice. We played Argentina. Those aren't great teams. We played Portugal, Nigeria, and Jamaica. Not great teams. Mm-hmm. Sure, they scored a lot against those teams. Congratulations.
Right, where it almost should have been flipped, where it's like you're bringing in younger players beforehand, really seeing what they're capable of, and
Yeah,
then, either mixing those two, components, or then just saying, okay, I'm going to keep, quote unquote, this older roster.
right.
But yeah, I don't know exactly what the thought process is there. All I know is that Vlatko hasn't lost the match. So even though at times it's easy because I know sometimes I see the roster, I'm like, huh, interesting, position there or call there. But then at the end of the day, he's still the winning coach and, obviously on top of the rankings. But yeah, obviously
Yeah,
these players are going to, their playing time is going to come to an end one day. So I think it is a matter of time. I don't know what that looks like in terms of, decisions and why they were made. But I think too, with Vlatko's, previous experience of working with Rapinoe on a club level, obviously
yeah,
that's something that, they already have chemistry. He knows exactly how she works and what she's going to bring. But yeah, definitely
absolutely.
something to think about too, as we were talking about Tobin Heath's injury and just that's already another added thing there.
Yeah.
So, and then just how this is going to affect the club level as well of all these players, even the quote unquote unattached players of just not really being
Yeah.
around, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think obviously Carly has talked about this, and I think Rapinoe has talked about this, about the 2020 COVID pandemic actually helped their bodies get in better shape for this 2021 Olympics, which I totally get, because a year off of, I mean, it wasn't a full year off of actual competitive play, but it was a year of a break of competitive play, right? I think they played like a quarter of the matches they normally would, at least less than half the matches they normally would. So that does the body wonders. And I know I random thought, but talking about another sport that I watch, curling, there's been a couple of players who have said hey, the 2020 break was actually great because I got to have surgery on my knee to fix that injury, or I got to rest my elbow that has tendonitis, and knowing, as a soccer player, being man, I don't have to get my ankle kicked today is kind of a nice feeling, and you can actually recover from all those nagging injuries. So, and somewhat that definitely helps these older players. But I have to ask you, Jackie, do you know how many goals Carly Lloyd has scored in NWSL this regular season?
I do not. Do you have a number?
It's 0. It's 0.
Right.
So, but Vlatko says that NWSL form didn't matter, which is the other thing that really struck me as weird in that press conference. And that's something I actually do want to ask you about is you obviously cover this league, and to hear the national team coach say that form doesn't really matter in NWSL, that seems really weird to me.
Well, did you hear that directly from him, or did you hear it on Twitter? Just curious as to
that was the Twitter quote. So that was someone was covering it. That was the quote they put out there.
There's a lot of.
It wasn't that he said form doesn't matter, but it was
No, I know what you're saying. I even saw a tweet too where it was totally misquoted and just kind of almost clickbait, I guess you could say. Yeah, but no, he had definitely said in the press conference that I was tuning into, as far as he obviously the club level of the NWSL and the performance was something a deciding factor for him. So there was that he said, but I think because it's such big news, there's going to be people where they're like, oh, Vlatko said it didn't matter based off his roster. And it's wait a second, that's your interpretation. Obviously, everyone has different opinions. But that's something where, listening to the press conference, he definitely put his 2 cents in about that. And, even just saying Kristy Muse, she's a product of the NWSL. And obviously we see that there. So, it's hard trying to find those things just because you obviously – there's so many people who will tweet their 2 cents, and it's oh, that's my thing.
Well, and it's hard to because I'm not privy to these conversations, the press conference directly. So when I have trusted sources on Twitter who are in these press conferences and tweeting out the tweets that they hear or the quotes that they hear. And even then it's just hard to get the full context of the quote and the question and everything. So, last question about this roster as a whole, but just what are your general feelings about this team heading toward the Olympics? You're probably in a little bit better position than I am to be able to watch these matches because I'm going to have to wake up at 4 a.m. and you're just going to have to stay up until 1. So, what are your general feelings about this Olympic roster as we start this preparation really for the Olympics?
Yeah, I think something that really stands out, obviously, with COVID, things got delayed. And so, obviously last year there was like, what's going to happen type of deal.
Yeah.
But I think now it's like, oh, wait a second. Like, you had the World Cup in 2019, and then having, that year gap almost kind of helps you, because now it's
Yeah.
like, no one has won a back-to-back World Cup and then Olympic tournament, because they're so fast. It's such a quick turnaround time. So I do think that there is possibility of seeing an Olympic, gold medal here, obviously in the 2016, period was almost embarrassing, to say the least, of just the U.S. not even advancing. And so I think, there's a lot to say there from Jill Ellis's experience and what she was doing here. And now it's kind of like you have this new era of Vlatko, who was brought on at the end of 2019, and then in the middle of all the 2020 craziness, has still, maintained that winning streak. So I think it is, obviously night and day as far as just like seeing where we were at, this time before the 2016 tournament and now. But also, just still kind of a weird thing to kind of adapt to. But just seeing like the roster as a whole, there was like some kind of like, oh yeah, not seeing Ashlyn Harris and Ali Krieger. Sure, they're older, but those are players that you just kind of think of when you think of the national team. And then also thinking of like, oh, there's younger players like Sophia Smith, who, sure, she's not like, the super well experienced player with the national team, but
she's really fun to watch.
Yeah. And so I think just seeing like, just the entire like mix of players is something where I wasn't like super shocked, but I was also like, sometimes I could kind of see like where he's going with this. And then it's like, okay, well, when you look at, the forwards and the offensive side, like, how is that going to work in terms of just like trying to have a lot of I want to say this word of diversity, obviously not in terms of like race or anything, but diversity in the sense of like,
this roster is not very diverse. I just wanted to put that out there. It is not very diverse.
Just like, I think of how you're gonna like kind of manage like the depth of it up there, and what that's gonna look like. I'm always blown away with just like how Alex Morgan like had a baby and then is just like, comes back as if nothing happened. I'm like, what the heck?
So incredibly, like the women's national team. It's so like Joy Fawcett had like 4 kids and still won a Olympic gold medal and a World Cup and an Olympic silver, I think, after having children.
Right, like it's just
so Alex Morgan is going to bring the baby luck to this as well.
Yeah, maybe. So I feel like obviously that's like a very not tiny example, but like
kind of tiny.
A speck of like what this entire team makes up and how it's going to work. So just intrigued to see what's going to happen. I am like so excited that Christy Muse is on this roster. I feel like she's been just killing it, and her recent appearances with the national team. So it's just a matter of like, I guess we'll see what's going to happen. But just kind of like hoping that with all the traveling and the shorter time frames of games, that like it's something where they can kind of like get it down in terms of like how that roster is going to work and rotating players. Just also knowing when to do that in case it's like, oh, maybe you're fine, but like, let's just, make this rotation if needed so we can just keep things going. So I think the momentum is just going to be interesting. Like I was saying, it's not like we're in 2020 where, we have, thank God it's not we're in 2020, but like where you just built off the World Cup, momentum and enthusiasm. So now it's almost as if we're like starting from scratch and then trying to build back up to that.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about a point that you made, and that's that no one has won a gold medal after winning the World Cup. Very specifically, the U.S. has not done that. The best they've done was a silver when in 2000, when they obviously won the 99 World Cup here in the United States, went down under, lost to Norway in the final. It's actually up until at that point, it was the only final they'd ever lost in a major tournament until they lost to Japan in 2011. But 2015, they win the Women's World Cup in Canada. And then 2016, they go to Rio for the Olympics. They finished 5th. And it's the worst showing we've had in the Olympics. We've won the thing 4 times. And we've but up until that point, we had medaled at all of them. So do you think there's pressure to, like, you got to bring home a medal this time? Because, I hate to bring this part of it into, but they just released the LFG documentary, and then U.S. Soccer tweeted out things and there's still this pay equality, and they did it last year, or 2019, excuse me, during the pay equality dispute. Do you think that there's some pressure on this team to bring home a medal again? I like all of the things.
Right. Almost yes and no, because I feel like 2016, like that was almost 5 years ago. So I think just timing wise, everything looks very
Okay.
different. And then I also feel like the women have dealt with these, pay inequalities and even just, playing conditions for so long that they're almost just unfortunately used to it. And so I feel like that documentary and all that's happened with that, I feel like that almost can probably like give them more momentum to like keep going and like having people in their corner rather than, everyone or like, focusing on the side of it of like US Soccer Now tweeting things out on their 17 tweet thread, And so,
it was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. Did you watch the documentary at all?
I haven't watched the documentary yet. I did read the tweets, and I was like, there are 17 tweets about this thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So no, the documentary is on my things to watch. It's right after In the Heights on HBO Max that I need to watch. So I don't know if that like how that tells my priorities, but In the Heights and then LFG. So that's what I'm watching when I finally have time to watch.
I think it's something where it's just like I was saying, the momentum isn't right there where it's like we're still reveling in the 2019 victory.
Yes.
But I do think it's something that like obviously they're aware of. And it's like, when would your goal like not be to, win the like gold medal? Like obviously that's
the goal is to win no matter what.
Yeah, but I think with everything that's going on outside of it, like I kind of just feel like it's almost not going to phase them just because there's such like a team with this mentality of like we're in it to win it and like we're not going to let anything stop us unless you get to penalty kicks or something. I don't know, but I just think it'll be like something where it's like they're just focused and like ready to go for it. So I feel like that's just kind of where they're at, but it will be interesting, like in these next couple, or not even next couple, but like in a week or so when we start talking players, ahead of the send-off series, just what that's going to be like, just because these 18 players are now going to be, in these matches. So I think that'll be like a good check-in point to see if they bring on someone like Julia Ertz or where they're going with things. So I feel like after the send-off series, we'll kind of have a better idea. But even right now, it's like, oh, that feels so far away just because all this roster stuff isn't happening.
Yeah. Well, and you have a whole weekend of NWSL action before that, and then you're going to have NWSL action between the send-off series and the Olympics. So with that all said, Jackie, you have a lot of work ahead of you. Where can we follow you and make sure that we're being informed about NWSL goings-on?
Yeah, so you can actually subscribe to womenkickballs.com, and when you subscribe, you get you're the first to know about all these articles coming out. So I produce weekly recaps of the NWSL matches. Obviously, this week alone, there's 8 matches, so I kind of like broke that up into 2 parts. So with those,
this is a double match week. You're busy.
Yeah, it's crazy, but with those recaps, you get just like a rundown of the game. You get player quotes in there as well. I'm busy in press conferences too, so you kind of just get that whole thing. And if I'm like watching the game like intently and not doing laundry at the same time, I'll do my best to like live tweet those matches or those press conferences. So you kind of get the inside scoop of that. So when you subscribe, it's free to do so, but you also get a free Woman Kickball sticker. But all that can be found at womankickballs.com, and all the social media things are just at womankickballs. So.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Before you get out of here, we'll just recap this real quick so that we're all on the same page. The Olympic schedule for the women, so that everyone knows what's going on. So you have 3 matches. First off, the send-off series. We'll talk about that. July 1st at 7 p.m. in East Hartford, Connecticut, Rentschler Field. Actually, it's a different name, but it's Rentschler Field in my mind. That is Thursday, July 1st. Then Monday, July 5th at 5 p.m., they will play again. Both of those matches against Mexico in East Hartford. And then they're going to get on a plane and fly to Tokyo, and they will play 3 matches in Group G of the Summer Olympic Tournament. They are in the same group as Sweden, New Zealand, and Australia. They will play Sweden on Wednesday, July 21st at 4:30 a.m. my time. That is Eastern. Then on Saturday, July 24th, they will play New Zealand at 7:30 my time, so I get to wake up early and go to Bart to watch that one. And then on the 27th, that is a Tuesday, USA, Australia will close Group G play and actually close group play as a whole. And that is at 4 a.m. here on the East Coast. Then we have, like I said, a break July 30th. It's about 3 days off. July 30th, you have the quarterfinals. August 2nd, you have the semifinals and the gold medal match. A few days after that, on August 6th, the bronze will be August 5th. Hopefully, the U.S. is playing on the 6th, not the 5th. But that is the schedule ahead. It is hopefully 6 matches in a very short amount of time. And hopefully Jackie will be, I don't know, I'll be caffeinated. Jackie may be caffeinated. We'll be surviving somehow to make sure that we are covering all these matches, because it is, it's an exciting time for the U.S. women's national team. Again, I don't mean there's anything wrong. It's the second most important tournament for these women. And they're, obviously the Women's World Cup is number one. This is absolutely the second most important tournament that you want to win. You want that gold medal to stand on stage and have the, national anthem played. So, Jackie, I appreciate you being here with us. I appreciate everyone for listening. Make sure you follow Jackie at Women Kickball so you can stay up to date on a lot of NWSL action, like a lot. The summer is jam-packed with NWSL action, and it's worth, I will continue to say this, it's worth watching. If you are a U.S. men's national team fan, you're probably buying that Paramount Plus subscription because you're going to have to use it to watch World Cup qualifiers. I'm cool, and I bought it when they first announced their partnership with NWSL, because you also get all the NWSL matches on there, and it's worth it. It's worth every cent that you pay to watch all these NWSL matches on Paramount Plus. So again, thanks for listening, Jackie. Thanks for joining me, and I will talk with you later, and I hope that you continue to revel in your post-grad glory.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me on. Always fun to chat.
Thanks again to everyone for listening to this episode of Soccer for Us. Make sure to follow the show on Twitter at Soccer for Us Pod. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the Soccer Down Here station on whatever podcatcher you are listening right now. That is how you will get every episode of Soccer for Us automatically downloaded to whatever device you're using. And you also get the daily Soccer Down Here show. We will be back shortly with a breakdown of the U.S. men's national team's Gold Cup roster that should be announced probably by the time you hear this podcast. It's already going to be out. We'll have a breakdown of that, as well as a preview of the games that we will have in the group stage. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.